Ready for some fun? Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this special joint meeting of the Sterling Heights City Council, the Planning Commission, and the Zoning Board of Appeals to order. If you would please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear God, please bless our elected officials. Grant them courage and wisdom to do what is right for all citizens. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Ms. May, can we please have the roll call?
Mayor Taylor.
Here.
Mrs. Sarowski.
Here.
Mr. Majek.
Here.
Mr. Radke.
Present.
Mrs. Schmidt.
Present.
Mr. Yanez.
Here.
Mrs. Zarko.
Present.
For the Planning Commission, Mr. Inks.
Present.
Mr. Rowe.
Present.
Ms. Wright.
Present.
Mr. Kopp. Ms. Lasai. Ms. McGill.
Present.
Ms. Sarau. Mr. Weekai.
Here.
For the Zoning Board of Appeals, Mr. Koski.
Present.
Mr. Graff.
Present.
Ms. Jackson. Mr. D'Angelo.
Present.
Mr. Shahab. Mr. Fenn.
Present.
Mr. Weekai.
Still the same guy here.
Mr. Ancona.
Present.
Mr. Youssef.
Present.
All right, thank you. We do need approval of the agenda by City Council, the Planning Commission, and the ZBA. Is there anyone who'd like to make that motion?
Mayor Taylor,
Mrs. Zarko.
move to approve the agenda by the City Council, Planning Commission, and Zoning Board of Appeals. Support.
Been moved and supported. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. This is a special meeting. We have a joint session tonight of the City Council, Planning Commission, and Zoning Board of Appeals to talk about zoning and our zoning ordinance and planning in general. The presentation is Zoning 101, and it is going to be led by some consultant, but I'll turn it over first to our city planner, Dr. Jake Parcell. Dr. Parcell.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor, members of council, members of planning commission, members of zoning board of appeals, Mr. Vanderpool and Mr. Koszewski. So very excited tonight to see 25, my favorite elected officials and volunteer board and commission members for what is going to be very fun and very entertaining presentation on Zoning 101. So as many of you know, we are making a substantial investment in our code of ordinances this year to align our zoning ordinance with our recently adopted master plan, a lot of our efforts through our climate action plan, sustainability plan, and to bring everything forward in a very, very easy to use, forward thinking zoning ordinance. Something that hasn't been wholly rewritten since I believe the late 70s, so about 45 years. So we are really excited about this project in the Office of Planning. Our goal is to bring everyone together on the same page tonight from our boards that review and use the zoning ordinance the most to really kick this off officially for our community, help move things in the forward in the right direction as we start with our supplemental meetings later this month, and to recap some of the efforts that we have taken underway so far. So we have a brief presentation with some room for questions throughout. We look forward to hearing your public comments at the end. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ms. Boehm from Giffords-Webster and Ms. Miller from Giffords-Webster. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Jill Boehm with Giffords-Webster. Delighted to be back helping the city of Sterling Heights following our master plan project that was adopted earlier this year. We are just really looking forward to helping update your zoning ordinances and get some of the master plan elements aligned with the zoning through that project. So we've got a short presentation for you on zoning because we think it's a really good way to sort of set the table for what we're going to do. Part of the value that we see in this process is keeping it open for anybody that certainly is serving on the Planning Commission or the ZBA or on council, but also to members of the public. So I'm glad to see we have a few people here to help them understand what it is that we're doing so that they can maybe figure out where they could plug into the process. So I think that's a good way to start it. I do have some points in the middle where you can stop and ask questions. For many of you, this will be material that you will be familiar with. But maybe there'll be a thing or two that you can pick up that maybe you'd forgotten about, or something new that you're going to learn on the way. And before I do that, I do want to just take a minute to thank you all for the volunteer work that you do for your city. You may not get that very often, but as a consultant and seeing the people in our different communities that serve on our planning commissions and our councils and our Board of Zoning Appeals, it's really great that you give your time to your community to help make it a better place. So thank you. So with that, I'll just get started. So in Zoning 101, we like to talk about the history of zoning codes, some of the legal context, and the zoning basics. So how did we get here? What are property rights in the history of zoning? What are the components of zoning and who does what? How does that zoning tie in with development review, and how is zoning changing? Fancy slide transitions there on that. Thank you, Alexis. So how did we get where we are today? Well, way back in the founding of our country, we started thinking about property ownership. And we noticed that there was property interests. We had this bundle of entitlements that were defining an owner's rights. Those were privileges and limitations in the use and enjoyment of their property. So we state that we have private property rights that gives an individual the right to choose how their property is used and any benefits derived from their property, and to exchange property between two parties. Okay, that's pretty easy. But we have a little bit of tension here, because there are some ways in which we see that the value of land is how it can benefit the individual. But then we also see, on the other hand, there's value of land and how it responds to society's needs. So there's some tension with that. So there were some who were very much on board with the value of land is how it can benefit the individual. So James Madison said, government is instituted no less for the protection of property than of the persons of individuals. And John Adams said property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. But on the other hand, when we think about value of land and how it responds to society's needs, we have Ben Franklin saying that private property is a creature of society and is subject to the calls of that society whenever its necessities require it, even to the last farthing. And Thomas Jefferson said, a right to property is founded in our natural wants, in the means with which we are endowed to satisfy these wants, and the right to acquire by those means without violating the similar rights of other sensible beings. And as we have thought about how to regulate the use of land, we've grappled with that tension for many, many years. The Constitution gives us some limitations on our governmental powers. We have the 5th and the 14th Amendment, which guarantees due process, equal protection, and just compensation. So you may have heard the word takings. That's what we're meaning there. So procedural due process means that you have to have proper notice that a decision affecting your property interests will be made, a hearing that provides you an opportunity to present your position, evidence, and support, and a record of the proceedings that reflects the government's reasons for its decisions. So you do these things on a routine basis when you have your meetings with your Zoning Board of Appeals, Planning Commission, Council. These are things that you see frequently, and that's where this comes from, is this idea of procedural due process. Any legislative decisions are presumed valid unless they're found to be arbitrary and capricious. We want to make sure that things we're doing relate to the case at hand and the land at hand. Quasi-judicial and administrative decisions must be based on specific facts and competent material evidence. Written decisions must reflect facts and reasoning. That's why you may hear your city attorney stressing the need to present your findings of fact, to make sure that your motions are complete. And we'll talk more about that later. Regulations, our zoning regulations, must advance a legitimate governmental interest, which is typically what we say when we talk about health, safety, and welfare, and be reasonable as applied. If we think about takings, that can be something where we're saying that private property is being deprived of its value. So the amendment, Fifth Amendment says private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. And the Michigan Constitution says private property shall not be taken for private use without just compensation, therefore being first made or secured in a manner prescribed by law. So what those things mean are we can't put so many rules on a piece of property that it is effectively not able to be used. Equal protection is another key element of zoning because we want to make sure that every property that is similar to another property is treated the same way. So that is part of our equal protection. And that means our zoning rules must treat similar properties fairly. So we want to make sure that we don't have unfair exemptions. So an ordinance that lets one specific project skips the rules that everybody else follows without a clear benefit to public health or safety. That means when we apply our zoning standards, we apply them all the same way every single time when we're using the same situation. We may have exceptions when we do like a plan unit development, for example, but those are when we're seeing a clear benefit to the community, advancing other community goals. We don't want to favor one business where we give special perks to a single company or owner, such as approvals that might not be offered to others, especially if the sites and impacts are really very similar. Or targeting a group too narrowly, so banning or overly restricting one type of use or user, like an apartment building in certain areas, without tying it to broader community needs or planning goals invites lawsuits. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding those things. Free speech is at the heart of many land use cases. So we do see adult entertainment types uses, demonstrations on private properties, signs and billboards. Those will be many of the things where we want to be very careful in how we are regulating those to make sure that we're not infringing on free speech. Freedom of religion is another part of that. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. We want to make sure that if we are treating places of worship, regulating those, that we're regulating them in the same way, and also that we're not regulating them in a stricter way than other places of assembly. So we may look at things like parking, setbacks, road situations, and ensuring that we're not being overly restrictive. We are watching for the RLUIPA, Religious Land Uses and Institutionalized Persons Act, to make sure that we are not putting stricter restrictions on religious land uses that we would not put on other places of assembly. But property rights in the U.S. legal system have never been absolute. The bundle of rights has never included the absolute right to do anything with the land. People are allowed to possess, use, enjoy their land, but zoning can limit some sticks in that bundle, but not take too much without justification. So this is kind of a key point, and frequently when we have a variance request or something before the Planning Commission, we get members of the community who say, oh, I don't want that development. I don't want them to do anything with it. Maybe it's an undeveloped piece of land. I don't want anything to happen with it. Why can't we just leave it a park? And what we sometimes in the gist of the discussion, we miss the opportunity to say because someone owns that land and they have private property rights, so they should be entitled to do something with it. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they can do whatever they want. And so that's where we often find that tension. And you all are nodding your heads, many of you, so you understand that, you feel that. But we really didn't have zoning before the 20th century, really. Most land use regulations relied on common law theories of nuisances. So you could do what you want unless it's deemed to be a nuisance. Those were things like, we tended to get into things like overcrowding, noise, air pollution, sewage, and things like that. In 1893, the Chicago World's Fair, the City Beautiful movement emerged. And that was sort of a signal that there was going to be a big change in urban areas as we started thinking more about how to improve the quality of our areas. So the first zoning ordinance was in New York City in 1916. Michigan followed along pretty quickly thereafter in 1921. The U.S. Department of Commerce developed the first state zoning enabling act in the 1920s. And in 1926, the record case Euclid versus Ambler Realty was the first case that went to the Supreme Court that established that zoning was a valid governmental power. But the world was a much different place in 1926 than it is today. Overcrowding of cities was a serious public health issue. Sprawl wasn't really an issue then. And so it's interesting if we think about the kinds of regulations that were put in place 100 years ago, how many of them are out of date today and maybe have led to the way that certain areas have developed over time. I'll just pause right there. Does anybody have any questions on the first part of that kind of the history bit? Nope. All right, we'll go on. So components of zoning and who does what. So our conventional zoning is called Euclidean zoning. That was based on that Supreme Court case from 100 years ago. It's based on separating uses from one another. That was really getting to the heart of what people were concerned about. We wanted to make sure that industrial uses were over here, that office uses were over here, that single-family residential was over here, and maybe we had apartments over here. We wanted to make sure everything was separate to avoid any negative impacts on mostly single-family residential. And over time, those regulations have tended to get more complex, and often we include a lot of design standards in there as well. In Michigan, communities who use zoning are required to have a master plan for land use and review it every 5 years. It doesn't necessarily mean that the community has to update it every 5 years, but every 5 years, you're required to take a look at it, look at your goals, look at the future land use map, and say, yes, this is what we still are holding to, or we're updating it. The master plan guides our zoning districts and regulation standards through the discussion of future land use and the future land use map. We can use this guide to help us with discretionary approvals. So things like special land uses, variances, and site plans have to align with master plan policies to avoid legal challenges. Where communities have not updated their master plan in 10, 15, or 20 years, if there is a legal challenge to that, those communities could be vulnerable because they haven't made sure that their zoning, their regulations for the development of property are in alignment with the vision of the community. So we don't have to worry about that here, as we just have a fresh master plan and we are ready to go. The zoning text that we have, so the master plan is our guide, our guiding policy. The zoning ordinance itself is our regulatory framework. Those are the rules by which we allow property to develop. The text regulates development. It describes our districts, the geographic boundaries that we have in the community. It provides for site standards, things like landscaping requirements, lighting, parking, waste removal, and use standards. We may have certain uses that we have additional conditions when we allow them in the community. Importantly, it establishes a process for development review. So how do I get through the process of developing my land as a restaurant? That needs to be provided for in the zoning ordinance. And it defines terminology. When we look back in our zoning ordinances, especially one that's with the rich history that we have here of 45 years or so, we may see that things that were defined 45 years ago, maybe they were uses that we had in the community that maybe we don't have anymore. Or maybe we have new uses today that we didn't anticipate 45 years ago. We want to make sure that those are kept updated. And then again, the zoning map is based on the future land use map in the master plan. So our master plan is on the left and the zoning map is on the right, and that shows where the districts and the text are located. Ideally, we're going to be making sure that these two maps are in alignment with each other. Now, we can amend our zoning ordinance. That's about the process that we're going to be embarking on now, but you can do those things, and you do them from time to time. You can amend the zoning map, the text, and you can amend the map, which might be considered a rezoning. We always have to have a public hearing. Planning Commission makes the recommendation to City Council, and City Council adopts the amendment. Amendments can be initiated by a property owner. They can be initiated by the Planning Commission. They can be requested by the City Council and directed for the Planning Commission to do that, or it can be the result of a court order, which that's not the one that we really want. We want to be more proactive than that. So the Planning Commission prepares and adopts the master plan for land use. That is their authority they have that's bestowed upon them by the state of Michigan. They have that role. But they can't make the zoning ordinances also because that's a legislative action. That belongs to City Council. So the Planning Commission studies and prepares and adopts the master plan, studies and reviews zoning ordinance amendments and then sends those on to city council, and council adopts the zoning ordinances and/or amendments. I'm going to go back to this one because what we should have on here as well, and I think we do, talk about the zoning board of appeals and where you fit in terms of allowing the variances. But this is a good place to stop for a moment and just talk about that real quick, because I think the zoning board of appeals then would understand that with all the work of the planning commission and council to create the regulatory framework for the city, that when variances are brought to you, that really those are going to be cases that are going to be something really unusual, something, interesting about the property itself. Maybe it's got an interesting shape or a difficult topography. Sometimes, I was at a meeting last night and someone said, well, I might go to the zoning board of appeals because this is, and they'll grant me this, it's just a silly rule, it's a silly ordinance. And I was like, no, that's not the reason why you will get a variance. ZBA does not grant a variance because they don't like the rule. If you find that you don't like a rule, you request it to planning commission. Hey, could you study this rule? Because we're getting a lot of people in before us asking about this, and it doesn't make sense to us. So I had to kind of take a moment and give them a little education break in the middle of the meeting, because that's an important point that I think a lot of people miss when they're not necessarily engrossed in this like you all are. It's also a good point here to talk about conflicts of interest. So in a community where you live and you might work, you might have conflicts of interest, and it's just always good at this point to kind of remind folks that if you do find a time where you might have a conflict of interest, to just let the city attorney know about that. Generally, the rule is if you stand to benefit financially from the outcome of a case, you have to recuse yourself from deliberations. And it's also a good time, if we're going to talk about conflicts of interest, our favorite one, which is not conflict of interest, but an Open Meetings Act, email communication. And I think people are really catching on that this is a really important thing. But if you get an email from the city and all the commissioners are on it, all the planning commissioners or all the zoning board of appeals members, and you have a question about something, do not hit reply all. It only takes one small innocent question to start an avalanche of exchanges via email about maybe something that's on the agenda. It's just good practice to just never hit reply all. And so I see Mark laughing, and so it's probably a good thing that we mention. We try to do that whenever we're doing a training, just because it's a good thing to remember from time to time. Any questions on that bunch of information so far? No. All right. Moving on. Development review. So we talked a little bit about a zoning map amendment, a rezoning. Rezoning is changing the classification of the property on the official zoning map. It results in new regulations for how the site can be used and designed. Again, it can be initiated by the community or the property owner, and there's a public hearing required. Site plan review is the, Site plan review is the process by which the community reviews specific development proposals to make sure that they comply with all of the zoning ordinance standards. Site plan review is initiated by application, and there's a number of different ways that can happen. It can be done administratively. There can be a site plan review committee. It can be the planning commission. In some communities, it still will also go to city council. That's a very old, outdated, and completely unnecessary process, because you've got planning commission or you've got staff that can do that work. Special land use, those would be things that might be compatible with permitted uses in the district, but there might be something about the way they operate or their qualities that require a little bit closer look. It could be that maybe it's a restaurant with a drive-through, for example, where maybe generally speaking they're fine in a commercial district, but where a commercial district abuts a residential area, that might be a case where we want to take a little bit of a closer look. So we might say that that's a special land use. Again, that would require a public hearing as well. Plan unit development, you are allowed to have a plan unit development as a development tool. That's part of our Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. They permit flexibility in the regulation of land development and encourage innovation. So these can be used to preserve natural features. We might have other things that we want to incorporate. Maybe it's just a little bit too challenging to use our existing zoning language to review a particular project. It has to have a site plan and a public hearing. It can be approved by the Planning Commission, legislative body, or an authorized official, but most communities have that go as a recommendation from the Planning Commission to the legislative body. The PUD is, I think, is worth noting too, that because it offers some flexibility, some waivers, it allows some deviations, it should be very clear to applicants and to the rest of you that that's not a route to go if we just want to get some variances, but we don't want to go to the ZBA because we don't really have a hardship. We just want to do what we want to do on our property. So that's not a reason to use the PUD. The PUD is really that you've got something, a very creative land use or a land use that's really promoting the goals and objectives of the community that just can't be approved under the traditional regulations. So just a couple of highlights on how zoning is changing. Some of these things we'll be talking about. Form-based zoning, you do have some of that, mixing of uses, housing, accessory dwelling units, missing middle, environmental sustainability, mobility and transportation shifts, data centers, as well as style and format. So communities grow, shift, redevelop, zoning has to keep up with that. New technologies, markets, living patterns, we're constantly challenging our existing rules. Good zoning codes are periodically updated, refined, and recalibrated. It doesn't mean that every time a new trend comes along that the city needs to, oh my gosh, we have to tackle this project, this new thing is coming. Sometimes you can think about, well, what is it similar to? How else do we regulate that? What do we have in our code now? Good zoning, I think, will be woven, when you make amendments to it, woven into the standards that you already have rather than just tacking new things on every time you have a new thing. Is it makes it really complicated and you can end up having some real conflicts in your ordinance because of that. Form-based codes, this is a different kind of zoning. We talked about Euclidean zoning before where we're separating all the uses. Form-based codes care less about the use in the building and is more focused on the building form and the relationships of buildings and public spaces. We use form-based codes to use the building to help shape that public space. Typically, we're going to use it in areas where we want there to be more vibrancy, more walkability, supporting that through those kinds of standards. This is just an example. I think we showed this example in our last joint meeting that we had when we were working on the master plan. This is Columbia Pike in Virginia. The 2001 site condition was like a little dumpy one-story building. The form-based code that they had at the time projected that style in the middle. And what's important to note about that would be the ground floor open windows where there's things that you can look in, you can see what's happening, the street trees, the building with a defined first floor. The other floors have like a vertical orientation. The top floor is kind of set back a little bit. What they actually built, it's pretty close. They do have the open windows on the first floor. It's not exactly what they had in mind, but it's a pretty good real version of that. They have an interesting corner on it. They've got some different changing in materials here, which is nice to break up that facade a little bit. It's a pretty big building. So again, the difference between standard zoning and form-based, we're separating uses in standard zoning. They're typically very text-based. Form-based zoning will have more mixing of uses, focusing on form in the public realm. They're usually more visual and graphics-based. But a lot of ordinances mix conventional and form-based codes together because there's just some places that you don't really need the form-based structure, and that's okay. We think about mixing of uses. We're allowing residential, commercial, sometimes light industrial uses within the same district or building, which is, again, very different than our traditional single-use Euclidean zoning. We might see vertical mixing of uses, like this building here where we have shops down on the ground floor and then apartments up above. This is a really terrible photo, I'm sorry, but I was driving one day and I was sitting at the stoplight. I'm like, hey, look, it's horizontal mixed use. It's an apartment building and an Aldi grocery store right next door to it. And I thought, how great is that? That's a wonderful place very convenient. So obviously a lot more walkability with that. And that was an interesting area because that was not an area where they were going to have a lot of like 3-story mixed-use buildings on their own, that they were more of a single-purpose kind of township, and that was their approach to it, and I thought that was pretty good. Other tools we have, we can do is overlay districts. Overlay zoning is, say we have, this is also a horrible graphic, we have a zoning map underneath, a regular map that might have just any of your districts. We might say we have a corridor that we want to have some continuity with. We want to have some shared things. We want it to look a certain way without changing everybody's zoning districts, because that can be confusing and that can cause a lot of problems with creating nonconformities. We might want to avoid that. We're just going to add a layer of regulation over the top that would have maybe some of those additional, they could be design-based standards. They could add in uses if that was appropriate in that area too. Density bonuses, maybe you're going to trade density, will allow more density in some areas in exchange for something else that you would like to see. Flexible design standards could be 0 side yards, pedestrian-oriented entrances, but providing some boundaries or guardrails on how flexible you are going to be, and making it clear there what are the standards that go along with this. If we're going to be flexible, do we all understand what the criteria are? Does the applicant understand what the criteria are? So it's important to think of those things as we're going through this. We think about housing. Many communities exploring zoning standards to ensure that there's plentiful housing in their communities. Zoning tools are including expanding the allowable housing types like accessory dwellings, like this one on the top, and inclusive design and mixing housing types. This could be a single family home, but you see it's got 2 front doors. That's a duplex house. So just thinking about other alternatives and some of the things that we'll be exploring as we go through this. Environmental and sustainability related regulations, so thinking about lot coverage and impervious surfaces, trying to mitigate stormwater runoff. Natural features protections like steep slopes or woodlands or wetlands. Cluster developments and incentives for preserving open spaces and natural features. This is just a little quick example of a cluster where you have 6 lots and you could do 6 houses in this area. It's still 6 houses, but they've all been kind of grouped over here into 2 triplexes or grouped in another way, and maybe there's some benefit to that from a natural features standpoint. Providing for electric vehicles, charging stations, looking at parking standards, non-motorized transportation, providing for sidewalks, pathways, parking standards for bicycles, and parking reform, which we know you've been working on. Alternative energy and data centers. So while in the past couple of years we've been really focused on alternative energy, a new use has come to town, not literally, I don't want to make anybody nervous, but data centers, everybody's hearing about it, we're talking about it, all of our communities are talking about it right now. So looking at things, and again, how do we regulate something similar, and where might we need to strengthen things to address some of those local impacts? And then approaches include updating the performance standards and the review process. So style and format, thinking about how ordinances are never done and text should change with the times. Organization is something that we really like to focus on, and usability. And so those are 2 big things that we'll be looking at through this process as well. So that wraps up the Zoning 101. Any questions on that? Anything we didn't cover that you would like to know more about? All your questions, or you knew everything already? Great, okay. Well, moving on, thank you for letting us do that. 2 other quick things that we wanted to run over with you. The zoning audit, so as a follow-up to the master plan, we did a zoning audit. So what is that? It's like a health checkup of the zoning ordinance, looking at outdated language, conflicting provisions, confusing text. Kind of gives us an opportunity to take a first pass at opportunities, identifying those for improvement or alignment with current best practices, looking at things that might conflict with state or federal law or case law, And then following a master plan, really looking at areas of the ordinance where alignment is needed to further implement those new goals and objectives. So we did do this in July of 2025, so a few months ago, in advance for the zoning ordinance project. In this packet, we had the 2026 update. We updated with planning staff comments and their areas of concern. We've got a couple of surveys that are running, and those survey findings will be added. So we'll have a more complete document. We thought it would be good to have it all in one place. I don't know that we intended to necessarily go through any of that, but the Planning Commission will be looking at that as we go forward. And then, as I said, we've been working on a couple of zoning surveys, so I will turn it over to Ava and let her give the quick highlights of the community survey.
Thank you, Jill. All right, so as Jill just mentioned, we have 3 surveys currently running throughout this zoning update process. So the first one that is currently closed was the community survey that we have a brief summary of the results for. And then additionally, we have 2 other surveys. One is for the Planning Commission, and then the other is for Code Enforcement and the Building Department, which are both still underway. So the goal of these surveys is to understand how people use the zoning ordinance, the things they like, and the things they would like to see improved. And so for the community survey specifically, there were 120 respondents total, which is quite a lot for a zoning survey. So that was awesome. So the first question asked how often people use the zoning ordinance. Almost half of the responses said they never used it, but about 9% said they used it monthly or more. For the second question, why do people use the zoning ordinance? Most of them said they were an informed resident, but we had responses for each of our answer choices. So people were on board commission, a design professional, work in real estate development. The other was mainly like business owners, developers. And then, so the other 10 questions, the third question was how people view the zoning ordinance. So people mainly viewed it online only or online as well as a downloaded PDF. Very few people used a hard copy of the zoning ordinance, surprisingly. A large majority of the respondents think the zoning ordinance falls right in the middle of easy to use and not easy to use, with slightly more leaning towards not being easy. Throughout the survey, people were saying they were confused about the language being too vague, or as well as the formatting. People mainly access the zoning ordinance for residential information, as well as viewing zoning districts and the zoning map. Those were the main responses that we saw, and then the specific districts that were mentioned included 2-family, multiple family, mixed-use districts, and heavy industrial. And then people also used it to look at parking and sign requirements. As I had previously stated, the vague language and the formatting people found confusing. So respondents wanted to see more specific language and user-friendly formatting, like having links throughout. And then most respondents responded that they do not see any conflicts in the zoning ordinance. One specific mention was regarding the floodplain overlay being based on outdated maps. Some improvements that respondents suggested included removing parking minimums, the 6-month food truck regulation, use variances, and special land uses that are routinely approved, making them permitted. And then in terms of dimensional standards for residential districts, many people suggested reducing setbacks, like for houses, fences, and sheds, offering more flexibility in height while maintaining neighborhood character, and modifying regulations based on circumstances, like having a larger lot size or if they lived in an older neighborhood. For commercial and industrial developments, they were opposing comments regarding height. So one respondent wanted more height while another one wanted less. Another one suggested defining one front setback instead of 2 for commercial and office zoning corner lots. And additional comments noted that parking should be allowed in front of buildings and that data centers should have their own requirements as opposed to being lumped in with industrial regulations. And then, so that kind of was a brief summary of the first community survey. So we still have 2 more to go, and then we will be providing all of the results at the next Planning Commission meeting. So those will be available to find online if you're interested in seeing all of those specific comments that people had said. But with that, if there are any questions, we can answer those right now. And then otherwise, I'll pass it over to Dr. Parcell. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. So before I conclude, I do want to just take the opportunity, because it was in your city manager report a few meetings ago, to say that Ava was actually one of our former planning interns, and a former resident of the city. So we have local expertise on this project. With Giffords Webster working on the master plan, we look forward to bringing this together and creating something that unifies our zoning ordinance and our master plan. And we're really excited to move this forward. Education has been at the forefront of what I've tried to bring forward as we move forward with our planning initiatives. So as people ask about this and the questions about why we're doing this, we hope to refer them to this video and these trainings and these materials so that they can kind of live on and help engage residents throughout this process. But moving forward, we have supplemental meeting dates, the 4th Wednesdays in February, March, May, July, and August. I know a lot of you came. Those will be planning commission meetings to those meetings as council members and as ZBA members. So we hope to see you all there as we move forward. Please reach out to me or anyone in my office at any time if you have questions. You'll all play an important role in this. This is a huge and momentous project for the city overall, for our businesses and residents, and we look forward to hearing your input as we move forward. And thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Parcell. Mr. Vanderpool, anything else on the agenda other than questions, comments, feedback from council and planning commission members?
Mayor, since you asked, I can't help myself. I think it would be helpful if Dr. Purcell talked a little bit about how we're going to streamline and automate in a more intuitive way the zoning ordinance, because it is a little clunky and cumbersome now when you go through it, even online, not only for developers, but for residents too. And I think that's going to be really helpful for the city council, the planning commission, and ZBA also.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vanderpool. So really our ordinance, because it has been amended so many times, can be very difficult to use and is seen in the community surveys not user-friendly. So working with Giffords Webster, they have a proprietary kind of application they use called Clear Zoning. Everything will be condensed into a singular PDF that will live on its own as the zoning ordinance. It has hyperlinks that work through each other. It's very graphic friendly, very reader friendly, removed of a lot of jargon that makes things difficult to understand as we move forward to public hearings. So if you're searching for something, if you're trying to link through sections or find where uses are available, you'll actually be able to click through the document rather than searching for everything on our current online hosting. So we aim to have this document be very streamlined, very user-friendly. And then from an application perspective, a lot of things require a lot of review from boards and commissions at this time. I hear frequently from the chair of our planning commission, or new chair of the planning commission, things that should or should not be cases that planning commission needs to review that have been, ordinances that have surpassed the need for looking at all of these restrictions, outdoor patio licenses, nuisance mitigation plans. So ways to apply these in ways that are more friendly for our business community and residents that we hope to include in here as well. So from a technical and an application standpoint, we hope to streamline everything and make it just friendlier for people to use, read, and then for us to do our planning work.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Parcell. I want to thank Ava and Jill from Giffords Webster as well. Thank you for your presentations, for being here today. Now I'll open it up to the members of the Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, and City Council. Any questions, comments, thoughts, or other feedback? Mr. Yanis.
Yeah, through the chair to the folks from Giffords Webster, I'm curious if you can come up. Sure. It seems over the years we've had some consternation between planning commission and city council with our PUD. I'm just wondering if you've reviewed it and if you had any specific thoughts on how our PUD is set up.
Not right at the moment, off the top of my head.
That's not
but-
the right answer.
Well, I wouldn't want to speak to that, ahead of the process.
Okay.
But certainly, our approach will be to look at that, to make sure that the process is logical, that it's clear, and we run into this in several communities where, we talk about these high goals, right? We talk about preserving natural features, we talk about unique and creative layout of land, but when it comes down to it, maybe our ordinances could be more clear on what we really mean by that. So let's get a little bit more specific so that applicant understands what's expected of them, that planning commission has a better defined goal of what they're looking for, and then when they make their recommendations, they've worked with that for council to be able to track how that aligns with the master plan, as well as the other community goals that have been articulated. So I think working with staff to understand where that misalignment might be between the planning commission and council will be really useful. It's not uncommon. We do see that in several communities where improving that process and making clear standards. And really the clear standards go across the board. Anytime we're talking about approvals that have a discretionary component to them, making sure that we're clear in there, as clear as possible. And it kind of goes to the point about being able to do some approvals administratively. We set the standards, we make them clear so everybody can understand it, and we know whether it meets it or not more clearly than having to weigh that discretion. Does it meet it? Not really sure. I'm not really sure what that means. So just trying to shoot for those.
Thank you. I just, my one comment is, it seems to me that our PUD was designed to be flexible, but, and it's very flexible. As a matter of fact, it's so flexible, people try to sort of fit square pegs into round holes as opposed to, putting something in that's zoned, but, maybe the property isn't situated that they can plant enough trees or put enough parking spaces or whatever. And it seems to me now we have just people coming and saying, well, this is a PUD, and it's, completely outside the scope of what that zoning might be for.
Right.
So.
And it was what I was saying earlier on that slide about PUD. It's not a tool to be used to avoid going to the zoning board of appeals. It's not I don't want to say get out of jail free card, because we shouldn't think of our zoning as that, but, it's not like a free pass to do whatever you want, right? We should make it, though, very clear through the ordinance language to applicants and to the reviewing and approving bodies, what do we want here? How do we give you, what is our trade-off? What do we expect? If we're going to give you some flexibility and we're giving you some waivers, what do we expect you to do for us in exchange for that?
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Yanez. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rowe.
Yes. Now that we have an adopted master plan, and we're obviously embarking on the zoning ordinance, one of the last chapters in that master plan is the zoning plan, and that is a very key component to begin initially provide that link between the master plan and the current zoning ordinance we have, and what we need maybe to consider doing and updating or rewriting the zoning ordinance. Would you describe the zoning plan for benefit of us?
Sure, and without having it, but if you refer to the master plan, you'll see that towards the end, it's a little matrix. And what it does is, and that's a good thing to add onto our zoning 101 slide. I'm going to add that because that's an important tool that's in the master plan. So it's a chart, and it shows all of your future land use categories, and it shows as a direct link, what is this category? Where do we find that on our zoning ordinance or our zoning map? And so it should be a one-to-one relationship. There are future land use categories that don't have their respective zoning district, and those would be ones where we highlight and we say the community will need to create that to align with its master plan. So that's the purpose of the zoning plan, and it's a good additional way to reinforce that connection between the master plan and the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Anyone else? Mr. Inks.
So a few big picture things that I think would be helpful to keep in mind as we update the zoning ordinance. And the first is that I would like to see us build in sufficient flexibility on the front end so that property owners and applicants, don't have to go to the ZBA and seek a use variance or seek variances that should just be built into the zoning ordinance to begin with. In a municipality as built out as we are and with land as desirable as it is, it would be a very rare circumstance where somebody can truly show that there's an unnecessary hardship and they can't actually develop the land in any way that would be allowable under the current zoning. And I think one of the problems that we have with the current ordinance is that we've restricted so much that people are incentivized to try to seek a variance, when the real problem is we haven't just built in enough flexibility on the front end. So I'd like us to make sure that that's one thing that we're taking a close look at. And then similarly, as Ms. Boehm said, and kind of following up on what Councilman Yan has said, making sure that PUDs aren't being used as a way to get around the variance process, because I think that's where a lot of the conflict has arisen. And if we have a well-drafted ordinance that allows the flexibility on the front end, you won't be having people seeking a PUD. They'll just be able to do something by right or special land use. Turning to special land uses, I think it's important that we think, are there legitimate, articulable reasons to have discretionary review for something, or have we designated a use as a special land use for some other reason, such as providing oversight or ensuring that the public is informed about a use that's going to be coming in at a property? If there's really no discretionary review going on, special land use probably isn't the way that we should be regulating that. There may be other mechanisms that can achieve the overall goals that we're trying to achieve, such as oversight or informing the public, but we really don't need it to be a special land use. And one of the problems that we see is, when you have a public hearing and you provide public notice and the public comes out, they get this sense of, well, if I come and I speak against this item, I'm going to be able to stop it. Well, if you've kind of just forced something into the category of special land use, but there's really no discretion there and you almost have to approve it, that gives a false sense of hope to neighbors who might be opposed to something. So providing public notice and public hearings just for the sake of providing notice and public hearings isn't always a good thing if you're not actually providing a mechanism for something to be denied. So that's something that I would like us to take a close look at for all of our current special land uses and anything that we are proposing to be a special land use. Should this actually be a special land use? I was glad to see in the zoning audit that we are contemplating moving away from listing the uses by district and maybe moving to a comprehensive table of uses. The zoning ordinance is easy to use right now if you know what property you want to develop on, and then you can just go to the district and figure out what you can use there. But say you're a new business owner who wants to bring a brewery or some other use into the city, and you want to figure out, where can I do this in the city? Well, to figure that out, you have to go through each district and look at all of the uses. There's no centralized location where you can look to and say, I can do it in B1, B2, but can't do it in B3. So having that comprehensive table of uses and moving away from the layout that we have right now, I think will be helpful. And then the last point, this is a little bit more detailed, but something that I would like us to start thinking about now is how we can incentivize shared open space in our mixed-use districts. This is something I've talked about during the master plan process, but I think it's going to be very important during the zoning ordinance update. Obviously, for the most part, private property owners don't have a significant incentive to allow non-customers to use their property. If you're putting in an apartment complex and you're required to have open space, there's no reason from a property ownership standpoint that you should provide that open space for the entire district. But that's contrary to the goals that we had when we created these mixed-use districts, where we want a cohesive district overall. So, it might be that the city has to provide those open spaces, or there could be things that we can do through the zoning ordinance itself to incentivize private property owners to open up those spaces to the general public. So those are some of the things that I'd like us to keep in mind as we go through the zoning ordinance update.
Thank you very much, Mr. Inks. Appreciate it. I'll come back to you. Well, go ahead, Mr. Rowe, if you want.
Thank you. Well, I still remember it. Okay. That's the first thing that Mr. Inks talked about is variances for the Zoning Board of Appeals. I remember in previous years, we would periodically have a joint meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals, especially as it relates to if they get a constant variances of similar nature, that, and that keeps repeating itself. I think that's what Mr. Ink is getting at, that perhaps, that's a basis for maybe relooking at the zoning ordinance and amending the zoning ordinance so that we don't get those, so many like variances. So I just wanted to mention that we had done that many years ago in the past, but, we haven't done it lately, and I don't know if that's the case now, if we know of a proliferation of similar variances. The other thing I want to mention is, we all know the dynamics that's going on and how it has impacted office use. That's something that we need to really take a look at also in the zoning ordinance. Now, we don't want to get rid of office use. I think that makes sense to have that option. But adaptive reuse seems to be something that we need to really consider for some of the current office buildings or any property that's currently zoned office. So just a couple of, just suggestions there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Mr. Radke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, as someone who frequently watches both the ZBA meetings and the Planning Commission meetings, the one thing that I wanted to touch upon, which I think Mr. Inks touched upon and our consultants did, is the constant creation of nuisance mitigation plans, storage containers, these things that are special approval land use that require a hearing, and then no one from the public shows up, the business owners don't show up, and they're just approved by road. I can't remember a time, and I've been on council for 9 years, where we've actually denied either a storage container or a nuisance mitigation plan. They've all been approved. So why are we having a hearing for them? Those could all be done administratively. They could be done, I guess if you have a hearing, it should be because they're violating it, because there's an issue that needs to be brought before a board. But I see there's been whole planning commission meetings where they approved 5 nuisance mitigation plans in a row with not one comment from the public. So if the public didn't care, and COVID showed us this too, we were approving them systematically through the planning office during COVID under special rules, and I think we had no complaints. We had one complaint about trash pickup. So if there are no complaints and the public doesn't seem to care, and our planning commissions are just approving them by rote, we should probably remove them from their purview because it's a waste of time. And it can be done very easily. Just have them presented, and I guess it would be okay unless there's a problem, then it gets brought back for elimination. So I think that's one of the big things is let's be smart with how we use our time. I think there's too many things in our current ordinance that require a meeting or a board or a check mark that seems to create work for our planners to do a lot of work and work for a builder to do a lot of work, makes it very complicated, but doesn't provide any value to the city or to the people doing the work. So if we could really fine-tooth comb the ordinance for that, I think we need both uses consolidated, and I think we need to consolidate our districts. We have C1, C2, C3, C4, and I've become an expert in these uses. But if you went out to the general public and I asked any one of them, what is this? They have no idea. They don't know the difference between C3 and C2 or C3 or C1. We need to, as Mr. Inks said, both consolidate, but we should make it simpler. We have whole districts that don't make a lot of sense to people unless you're a planner or our ordinance should be one written for the residents, not for anyone else. And I think sometimes we get tied up in this ball of trying to plan for every eventuality when a planning ordinance is dynamic and it's supposed to meet the needs of the now. So I would argue that we need to really consolidate. I mean, M1 and M2 make sense because we need industrial, but why is it M? Why isn't it I? Why doesn't it make it simple? But we have whole districts that we're going to be eliminating, things that drive me crazy. Parking district that we have zoned as, which makes no sense. We have transitional land use, which never made any sense to me because no one could explain to me what it was or what it meant. So if we could really go through them and make sure that we're grounding them in what people are doing now. I would also argue with Mr. Rowe that I think that office is kind of going through, I don't want to say a renaissance, but it's consolidating. But why can't we just add office into commercial or add commercial with office? Why does it need to be two zoning districts? What does office provide that commercial, why does it need to be separate? I think too much of this is that we say this has to be here and this has to be there for no real good reason. If you could put a corner store up, why can't you put an office there? Or vice versa. But we have created separate districts just, I think, hem things in for no reason. As to shared open space, that's a very good point. Back in the day under plats, they used to create parks and then gift them to the city to run on behalf of the residents of the new subdivisions. This doesn't happen anymore. And how could we maybe incentivize that a little bit more to have people give us stuff for community use? Because I take Mr. Ink's point that too often, if a developer has to create a space, you get a space like by a Target with a big ball that has no shade, it's all concrete with a couple benches. That's a community space under our C4 ordinance, and no one's ever going to use it. It's a waste. So why are we requiring developers to create things that never get used, that are just essentially, we required under C4 once upon a time to have a developer build a gazebo that I never saw anyone sit at. It was a big wasted gazebo. There's one on Shaner at 19 Mile right now, in the middle of a shopping center that doesn't get used by anybody. It's worthless, but our ordinance requires it. It's crazy. So let's see if we can do to fix that. I also agree with my colleagues. I think PUD should be tighter, and it should be higher or best use. The idea that a gas station could be a PUD seems to fly in the face of what the ordinance was meant to do. We have 42 gas stations in the city, but I have the best, the newest, the greatest gas station ever, and I should be able to use PUD to put it in a place that zoning wouldn't allow. That seems to basically show that the PUD in Sterling Heights has become a catch-all. And the problem with that is people are using it as a catch-all because our ordinance is so restrictive and hard to deal with. It's easier for them just to try to shoot it through the PUD process than to zone it conventionally. And we should all think about that. We've made it so hard to zone conventionally, to build conventionally, that we're requiring developers such as to come to city council and beg us to give them a project. So we need to go more to a form-based code, more to approvals internally, and to give a lot more flexibility both to our planners and to our developers. Because we keep on saying we're not getting these developments that other cities are getting, but we have to go look at their codes. Royal Oak, Troy, they have much simpler zoning codes, which much more flexibility, and they're getting the developments that we keep on saying we want to get. It's because we've made it so hard, people go, wow, I don't want to do this. And we need to really think about that. If we want these high-level developments that Ann Arbor or anyone else is getting, we need to, even Clawson's not really building up, but they're doing a lot of horizontal mixed use because they've allowed tremendous flexibility in their zoning code. And we don't, and then we wonder why. We make it very hard. Because a lot of our projects, instead of being a consolidated approach to an entire district, are one-offs. And we've become this one-off project. We have to think about districts and how we want them to be built together to a standard. So like for North Van Dyke, we need to have that knee wall for parking. We need to have that two-story requirement on the main road to create a picture of what the district should look like so it all looks similar. That's how you create a district, instead of just one building and hoping that the neighbor next door will do something similar. So I wrote here, too many special land uses. I agree with that too. I want to say, this is an open question, how often do we deny a restaurant through a special approval land use? I don't know, but I hardly ever see it happen. So why do we require them to be special approval land use? If we're not denying them, if we're not even really questioning them, why is it required? It's a waste of time. So we should really think about this. I'm sure I might have some more thoughts, Mr. Mayor, but for now, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Radke. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? Well, you better have those thoughts now, Mike.
Sure. I'll wait for another meeting.
Okay. All right, well, I want to thank again Giffords Webster for being here, our planning department. I do want to take a moment to thank the members of our Zoning Board of Appeals and Planning Commission. On behalf of the city council members, we appreciate the hard work that you do. We've had more of these special meetings in the last several years than I can remember. And we've done these in the last 4 or 5 years, but I don't remember ever doing them during the last, or the first 10 to 12 years of my term on this city council. I think it's very helpful for us to get together. It's helpful to hear your feedback. It's helpful to continue these conversations. Many times, ZBA and Planning Commission members are hearing, when I watch the meetings, I'm struck by just how in-depth the questions get. Still don't know if I fully understand how the round robin goes in the Planning Commission. It's like, you ask the questions, you go to the audience, you ask some more questions, then you get a motion, then you ask some more questions, and they just keep coming, and it's very impressive, and I'm impressed by all the work that you guys do, and certainly appreciate that we're going through a very important process right now, that even though our city is mostly built out, I think you're seeing that there are still developments that are happening, and I think probably in a city that's as built out as ours, when we have developers that want to be here, that want to put in apartment complexes, want to put in new shopping centers, want to be in Sterling Heights, it makes it a little bit more difficult because we're not necessarily working with a lot of open spaces. We're working with spaces that encroach on other uses. So to be mindful of that and to have the professionalism that you all have is certainly appreciated by our city council, our city administration, and our residents. So with that, I would say I'll close that portion. Let's see what we have next. We have communications from citizens. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak on any item not on tonight's agenda? You want to, Mr. Romano?
Can I speak on the short-term rentals?
Yeah. You can come on up.
Thank you. Boy, I see a lot of familiar faces. Good evening. My name is Joe Romano, and I'm here to speak, as I said, on the short-term rentals that this board is considering, or we're going to be doing on the revamping of some of the zoning ordinances. At the beginning of this meeting here, somebody said something about, and I'm going to kind of ad lib. Ben Franklin said, when you own your own property, you should be able to do what you want to do with it. But he also said, as long as you don't infringe on the rights of other people. Having said that, I've been a real estate broker for over 50 years. I've been a landlord for over 25 years. Short-term rentals don't work. Let me give you some of the problems, and I want you to consider this when you start talking about short-term rentals. The maintenance of the exterior, big problems. Short-term rentals don't care what they're going to do with the grass or the painting or the upkeep of the property, and it's hell trying to get hold of a landlord that's out of state that's renting it out. Noise problems. 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, loud music, people are talking, car doors are slamming. Your neighbors are listening to all this. Neighbors with kids, like myself, older people, older. Number 3, parking. Neighbors can't even park their cars because why? The party's going on. Everybody else has got their cars parked there. Plus, when they have a short-term rental and that starts, first thing neighbors do is, what do they call? The police department. Now, we've got to utilize our sources to go over there to tell them to be quiet. Not once, twice, or 3 times before a violation is issued. And then when the tickets are issued, the landlord gets it. Was it 30, 60 days before he has to come before the board, the zoning board, to say, hey, I did cut the grass. Meanwhile, there's 2, 3, 4 weeks that have passed that he's still doing this. Meanwhile, the neighbors are still suffering. We have 7 hotels within this area that we could probably drive to within 15 minutes, maybe 10. 7 hotels. You want to party? They got conference rooms. You want to stay someplace overnight to watch a venue? They got hotels, do that. They've got suites, you can use those, bring your family. We don't mind that. In fact, we encourage it. People come for the Sterling Fest. Good, great, love to have you. But don't come in my neighborhood for the weekend. Don't make a mess in my neighborhood. You know, Sterling Heights has always been what we call a bedroom community. It's quiet, people like it here. We've always stressed, people want to live, work, and raise a family in Sterling Heights. They don't want to live, work, and party. Freedom Hill cost us almost $17 million because of loud noise. Those poor neighbors are still suffering. And the people here on council, some of the people here on council and not on council that live in that area know exactly what I'm talking about. In the summertime, there is no peace and quiet when these guys decide. Ooh, that yellow light means I'm short. Okay.
$31 million it costs.
Sterling Heights is not a resort community. If you want to do something about short-term rentals, leave it at 1 year. I have no problems with that. I have nothing against short-term rentals, as long as they're a year. I have people right now in my neighborhood, the police have been out to 4 times because if it's a short-term rental. We've utilized our police department to quiet them down and issue citations. So my point is, again, take into consideration your neighbors, take into consideration who's lived there for a long time, myself being over 50 years. I don't need that kind of aggravation in my neighborhood. And I'm saying there's other places that they can do it. There's halls around here they can rent. Again, probably 4 or 5 within this immediate area, within a couple of miles. You want to have a party? Have it there. Don't have it here. Don't have it next door to my house. That's all. Have a good evening, guys. Nice to see everybody. Peace out.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Romano.
Sir.
Appreciate you being here. You know, if you want, you just call Mark ahead of time. You tell him you're going to be here to give a report as a commissioner, then we don't give you a time limit. You can speak for as long as you want.
But I'm here as a homeowner and not as a commissioner. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Anyone else under communications from citizens? If not, I'll close that portion and we will adjourn. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved and supported. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you again, everyone.